All right, let us get started here. I may be hard to recognize because normally, of course, I appear in my button-down shirt with my geeky author tie and so on, but it's laundry day. None of my good clothes are clean, so I've had to go with a t-shirt today. For some reason, I just felt like this was the t-shirt I had to have today. I can't imagine why this was my shirt for the day. Um, One line review, go see the movie. Loved it. So let us get started here. Let me share my screen. Hello. Let me share my screen. Optimized for video. And share. And here we go. I want to welcome everyone to Jazz Session number 11, The Goal Game, and other games for discovering your story. These are going to be ways that you either by yourself or perhaps with writing partners or a writing group can think through your story in a low pressure way to explore possibilities. And if nothing works, you've wasted very little time. These may not be the most fun games in the world, although sometimes they actually can be, depends on your group. So they are not games in the way that you might play video games or something like that, but they are definitely games by definition as we'll look at that. So for those of you new, the jazz sessions every Sunday, and they are available on my website, shoemaker.space afterwards. And we are giving free writing classes with a small caveat.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
They are free writing classes, but I certainly am also hoping to sell some books. We call this paying for the soup because the initial clip we used for this was from a Star Trek episode, Sitting on the Edge of Forever, where they talked about, okay, now you got to pay for the soup. You have to listen to the pitch. And traditionally, I always discuss two books of mine. On the right is usually my book, Making Story Models, which is tools for visualizing your stories, ways of drawing visual pictures of what happens in your stories, the elements of your stories, and so on. And that is, in fact, going to be relevant to some of the games we're going to look at today. Some of them are based off of diagrams we'll see in Making Story Models. And on the left, I generally have one of my fiction books. And this particular one is my newest novel, and I am so happy and proud of this novel, A Fine and Dangerous Season. Two science fiction writers, their editor, and a comatose mathematician confront ancient Celtic spirits who are using their own stories in a bid to take over the world. This is a book that I'm extremely proud of. It is the book I was made to write. It was inspired, in fact, by Jenna Ita, who's on the call. Hi, Jenna. Jenna Ita and Don Ray Ammon, who are the forces behind FireCon, in October 2023, put up a prompt a day for the month of October. A flash fiction prompt, they called it, but of course I don't do flash fiction. I started writing a short story every day in response to their prompts, and somewhere around day 5 or 6, I discovered that even though I'd written 5 or 6 stories in 3 or 4 different story worlds, they were all one novel. And I challenged myself to write a chapter of that novel every day in response to the prompts. Now, eventually, I reached a point where it's like, okay, I can see the ending coming, and I'm going to ignore the prompts if they don't lead to the ending. But the prompts got me going, and we're going to talk about that coming forward. Prompts are going to be a part of this discussion. Now, this book right now is only available in one place. If you click or scan that QR code, it is going to take you to The Writers of the Future Epic e-bundle for 2025. These are 18 books, ebooks. We're not giving physical books at these prices, but 18 ebooks from Writers of the Future judges and past winners. 18 ebooks from bestsellers, from award winners for the low price of $20. You are allowed to pay more. You're encouraged to pay more, but the minimum price for the 18 books is $20, which is just a little more than $1 per ebook. The actual price of these books, if you were to price them out on Amazon as ebooks, is $93. And that's not including 2 books that are exclusive to the bundle, my own book and Lazarus Black's The True Dragon of Atlanta, which are not available anywhere else, so you don't even have a price to order them on Amazon. They're only available here. So this is conservatively $100 worth of ebooks, which are available for a price of $20. So a quick look at the list. We've got stories in honor of Eric Flint, who was a Writers of the Future judge, passed away. Writers of the Future Volume 40 coming up. And then we've got stories by Eric James Stone, who is a past winner and a frequent attendee at the workshop. David Hankins, who is a recent winner. Steve Panizzi, who is in Volume 31, the best volume. I would know, after all, because that was the volume I was in. Year's Best Canadian Fantasy and SF Volume 2 is a number of bestsellers and great stories in there. Desmond Esther has his collection. Nancy Kress, who is the judge and a bestseller, has her collection, Future Perfect. Sean Williams, Laird Sean Williams, from Australia, who was a winner decades back and is now a judge, has got a trilogy, complete trilogy that you can't get anywhere else. Todd McCaffrey, a frequent Writers Future judge, great guy. Rob Sawyer, wonderful man, has got his Quantum Knights. Lance Robinson, a fairly recent winner, has his collection. We have mine, of course. Storm Michael Humbert is not here as a writer, but he's joining as an editor. He wrote or edited a collection called Intergalactic Rejects by various bestsellers, including Kevin J. Anderson. It's stories that they are proud of that were rejected and why they still stood by those. Mark Leslie's book, Stowaway. Jody Lynn Nye, the current coordinating judge of the contest with her Taylor's Arc. We have Lazarus Black with his True Dragon of Atlanta. And I cannot read the bottom because this stupid Zoom thing is in the way. Yes, Tucker's Grove by Kevin J. Anderson. So that's a little longer soup session than I normally do, but I want you aware of this. This bundle is currently open at the QR code at that URL, but only for 29 more days for the chance to get all these books. So now you can all tell them that, yes, I did my job to promote it. For those of you who are new to the jazz sessions, the rest of you have seen this before, but notice I gussied it up with a cool new color animated slide. When I talk to you about anything in writing, when anybody talks to you, always keep in mind tools, not rules. There are absolutely no rules beyond you must write. If you don't write, you're not going to be a successful author. And let's leave the whole AI, ChatGPT stuff out of this. The only rule is you must write. Anything anyone else tells you is a rule is just a tool. Anyone trying to tell you the rules of writing is either naive or trying to sell you something. It's all a tool. It's all things you can try and you can learn from and you can apply, but they are not rules because, as William Goldman told us, nobody knows anything. Now, he's talking about this in the Hollywood filmmaking business, but it applies just as well in all creative arts. Nobody knows for a certainty what's going to work and what's not. A rule should always work if you follow it. A tool is something that you can follow it and succeed, and you can follow it and you can fail. You can break it and succeed, or break it and fail. There is no rule you absolutely must follow. There are tools you can learn and master, and sometimes they're really good tools that you want to consider unless you've got a good reason not to. But never, ever, ever is it a rule, even if I call it one. It's very easy to forget this, and I tend to speak bombastically. I like the big statement. If I call it a rule, it's still a tool. Tools, not rules. We aren't looking at rules here today. We are looking at some useful tools, or hopefully you find some of them useful. Now, I often say at the start of these that this session's going to maybe be a little short, and it hasn't happened yet. Everyone I thought was going to run short of an hour ran more than an hour. This session's going to be a little long. It is by itself a long topic, and then I have a bonus topic at the end for those who want to stick around for it, which will add to it. It will complement the presentation itself. So we're going to be having a lot to cover here today, so I will almost certainly go beyond the hour. If you choose to stick around, wonderful. If you have to leave, I understand. But I'm just letting you know in advance that after we look at the games, we're going to look at prompts. Now, before we get into games, we want to talk about structure. And specifically, why do some people hate it? Structure, to many minds, brings to mind absolute brutalism, like this Soviet brutalist architecture from the 70s. To them, structure is a horrible, ugly thing. Whereas giving up structure is creative and beautiful, and you can do whatever you want. And this here is an art museum, I believe in Scandinavia. I want to say Norway, but I haven't looked up the notes in a while. And it's like, we don't have to be brutalist and boxy. We can be clever and creative. Now, if you actually know the first thing about architecture, you know there is one hell of a lot of structure in making this building happen. But the point was that the design started with, let's go reject all traditional sculptures and do something radically new. And so this is why many people think that structure is bad and non-structure is good. Because really, what good did structure ever do us? Well, sometimes when you don't have a structure, what you end up with is an unplanned hodgepodge mess that might fall apart at the lightest touch. So structure is kind of right up there with tools, not rules. Structure can help you. It can be a good tool. Structure can bind you. It can be a bad rule. Because ultimately, structure can be extremely helpful. This was a quote. I finally tracked it down after looking for a week. Former Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo was the first one who quoted in public on the record, where you can find it online, the phrase "form is liberating." I'm sure he was quoting from some earlier tradition. I can't find those online, but I could find a direct quote to Cardozo. The basic idea being that having a form means there's part of the problem you don't have to think about, so that you can concentrate on the parts that are unique. So form can really help you, but sometimes end up with stuff that's just a little really odd because the form took too far. I don't know what this is. It might in fact be another art museum. I look at this as like, okay, I can see the structure, I can see the plan. It just looks silly to me, just utterly, totally silly. And maybe that was their goal, but I look at this as like, what is this building? I see a cyclops with a long elephant-like nose. This is just a mess. But Picasso had the other opinion on structure, which is you learn it so you know what you're breaking, so that you know what you're changing. All of this structure discussion is to lead us into the discussion of what is a game. Now, We've all played games. We all know what games are. Do we really need a definition? Well, for the purposes of this talk and how I'm using the term game, we absolutely need a definition because game has meanings besides just play. Games are often used in educational purposes and analysis tools. It's a way of shaking you up by making you think in a free-form way, but a structured free-form way. So it's not just sitting around talking, it's sitting around talking with a plan. And therefore some sort of rules of the writing games. But the first of those is we don't need rules. It's sitting around talking with a plan until you have a good idea of what to write. Because the purpose of these games is to help you write. If you reach a point where you say, I know what has to happen next, throw the game out the window because our goal is writing. Our goal isn't playing the game. Nobody's going to be a sponsor for these games and pay you lots of money to win in them. They're cooperative games, so there's not even a winning involved. Winning is getting the ideas that help you write. Another rule, and yes, I said tools, not rules, so break these as you need to. But another general rule is don't throw out any idea as bad. Put the ideas out there. You can decide bad tomorrow. Tomorrow you can look at what came up and say, I can use this, I can use this. Oh, no way I'm using that. So you have no bad ideas, but you definitely can have some really good ideas. So take notes on what you're doing. Again, as we talked about earlier, this is no stress, no pressure. This is not something you have to quote unquote succeed at. If you're not getting anywhere in the game, try it again. Try a different game. Set aside, just have fun. And these games can be done again with groups so that you can have fun with them. They're less fun with an individual because it's harder to surprise yourself, but they can be fun even by yourself. If you've ever seen the typical Hollywood writing room when they're working on a movie or a series and you've got a bunch of writers in a room together, they could use games like this to explore ideas until they get the ideas that they say. That's what we need to work on. And in fact, the very first game we're going to look at, the goal game, originated in one of my sessions at FireCon. I mentioned FireCon before. Jenna's here, and now Dawn Ray has joined us as well. These are the driving forces, the geniuses behind FireCon, the best educational conference out there for writing and art for fiction. And I gave a talk on a related topic, and that related topic included the first of these games. And then I turned that into a longer talk on many different games. And so the goal here is to have fun. So I'm going to ask you all to volunteer. I'm not going to demand, I'm going to ask. When we get into some of these games, feel free to make your contributions because it is so much more fun when we together come up with ideas that none of us would come up with individually. And if you don't chime in and you make me just talk and talk and talk, by now you know I'm fully capable of doing that.
I volunteer as tribute.
Okay. So do not hesitate to jump in. And we're going to do this, but there's one thing we're not going to say, and this is my personal rule. You're not going to say the M word. That M word rhymes with bad bibs. We don't say the M word. Even though some of these games sound a lot like bad bibs, I had a horrible experience in my early life with my in-laws, with my sister-in-law, who was an early teen at the time, who absolutely loved to play bad bibs over and over and over again on a Saturday night to the point where I was ready to gouge my ears out. So I'm not going to say that these games are anything like bad bibs, but they might be a way to think about some of this. Just don't say it in front of me. So this is an expansion of that original goal game from FireCon. And anybody can answer any question, jump in. But we're going to start the game. This is a little bigger. This is maybe 20 to 30% more questions than we had in the original. But we're going to ask the questions. So who wants something? Who is our protagonist in this story? Somebody?
Rapunzel.
Rapunzel wants something. Okay. What does Rapunzel want?
Probably
Okay.
a bigger brush.
A bigger brush. All right. So we've already diverged from our source material, which is the fun part of this game. Okay. So why does it appear that Rapunzel can't have that bigger brush? What's stopping her?
She's broke.
She's broke. Okay, so what's she going to do? What's her immediate reaction to being broke to try to overcome that challenge?
Sell her hair.
She's going to sell her hair. Why does this fail? How does it actually make things worse?
And she no longer needs the brush.
She no longer needs the brush. Does she feel like she learned something from this mistake? I hear rumors that hair grows back sometimes even when you chop off 24 inches of it. Not that I know anybody who did that around here.
She does learn, and now she's, in addition to that, she's lonely because nobody can climb up to her tower.
Nobody can climb up to her tower. So now she needs to make a real concerted effort. So what's her new plan? And how does it come together?
She's going to sell love knots made of her own hair.
Going to sell love knots. Okay, so what is she getting wrong in this whole environment around her and herself that's actually making it worse when she tries to sell the love knots?
She still can't leave the tower.
Still can't get up the tower.
And she's putting too much of her self-worth into her hair.
All right, so there's a good internal revelation. So now she's at rock bottom. What is her suffering? What is her mood now that she's at rock bottom?
She's broke, lonely, and bald.
Broke, lonely, and bald. Okay. So now what does she fail to understand? And I think we just already kind of answered that one, that she's put her self-worth into the hair. And that's really, really not what she's really trying to address. So now she needs to dig deep. Now that she's understanding that, she needs to come up with a better plan. Get away from the selling the hair and getting a brush plan. What's her new plan? So that she's going to deal with the self-worth issues and the broke, lonely, and bald issues. What's her new plan?
She's going to learn how to sing. The idea being that she will sing and it will attract people to her tower.
Ooh, I like this. Okay. So this gets her towards what she really wants now, which is she's lonely and she wants people around her. Now, to make a really tense climax, we need to snatch that away from her right when she's almost ready to succeed. So how does this fail? What goes wrong?
She attracts an evil prince who wants to take her down, knock down her tower, and force her to marry him.
All right. So now, with everything new she's learned, she needs to have one final push. What is she going to do to stop the evil prince?
This is, by the way, where my stories, I often trip myself up because I get my characters in such a bad situation and I can't get them out of it.
And the beauty of a game is you don't have to spend, I mean, we spent 10 minutes walking through this to find that stuck point. And so you can now either solve it or go back. Now, I kind of have a suggestion for this one. She's got a whole bloody tower full of hair knots. She can dump those on the evil prince and bury him.
Set him on fire. See, that would be even better.
Yeah, set him on fire. So does this actually now achieve her goal? Because now she's got the prince running around buried in burning hair. Has she achieved her goal? Does this draw attention so people can hear her sing and come to know her?
Yes, because she's embarrassed and
Pause.
humiliated this evil prince who's been defeated by a girl with, by burning hair. And so now she's become famous, and all sorts of quality and interesting people will come, and all sorts of interesting people will come to her and want to be her friend.
And that gives us her new goal and her consequences. So now, obviously, a ridiculous example, but you see how we walked through a complete story structure by asking and answering these questions. When I did this the first time at FireCon, the someone who wants something was Mr. Spock. And what he wanted was a pet, and he couldn't have it because pets weren't allowed on the Enterprise. This was original series, and we didn't have pets on the Enterprise, only lab animals, and so on. And we walked through this, and we ended up with something that, well, Paramount wasn't going to sue us for fan fiction because it was really bad, but it was also really good. There was a story arc there. Essentially, what we did was we took the traditional 3-act structure with try-fail cycles, as documented, by the way, in making story models. We took that traditional 3-act structure and we just asked questions of what are all the turns, what are all the tries, what are all the consequences, what are all the fails, and put those together and answered the questions. Now, if you're doing this for a story that you kind of had some goals in mind, you would ask a little more specific questions. You would, come on. So it's like you kind of know who your protagonist is. You kind of know your antagonist. You kind of know some of these pieces. So you're not going to ask blindly. We're not going to make it up completely on the spot. You are going to ask something that is closer to the Start Anywhere game. Because you don't necessarily have to start at the front. If you want a traditional 3-act structure with try-fail cycles, you do need to answer all of these questions, but you can start in the middle and work your way backwards and forwards. Or you can even start everywhere. You walk in with the pieces you know, the pieces you care about that made you want to write this story, and then you start filling in the blanks, working from the answers you know towards the other answers you know, and trying to make sure that every step between makes sense and fits your goals. So these are 3 different versions of essentially the same game. The original goal game, wanting something, why you can't have it, what you do about it, why that fails, and so on. Start Anywhere just starts with the pieces you know now and works out. And Start Everywhere, you may know many pieces and start with those and work your way out. Why do I have the hiccups all of a sudden today? So those are 3 variations of that game. And now we're going to look at a few more. We're going to look at the Panzer's Goal game, because if you're a pantser like me, or some prefer to call it a discovery writer, you have no real plan. You just are starting to tell a story. Like, say, A Fine and Dangerous Season, where I was starting to write short stories to fit the prompts from FireCon. You have no particular story. You are just going through and putting pieces down on paper. But as you're doing it in your head, you're thinking, my character's succeeding too well. I kind of need a complication now. I kind of need for something to happen now to turn their momentum around. After you've worked with this sort of structure for a while, you get some intuitive feel. I've told the story to this group, or some in this group before, how my 3rd novel, The Last Campaign, was praised by Publishers Weekly as a meticulously plotted science fiction mystery. And there is a point in the story where I literally was saying, my character, Rosalia, the chief of police of Mars, is succeeding too well. Things are going too well. If things keep on this path, the book is going to be over halfway through. I need to kill somebody. And I said, who can I kill? And I started going through the established characters because it needed to be somebody that the reader already knew, so the death would have some meaning to them. I started going through the characters, going through, and I was like, no, I can't kill this one because she's the protagonist, she's the narrator. Can't kill her husband, that would piss off a lot of readers. I can't kill the mayor because I've got plans for him. I can't kill this one because he's the real villain. I can't kill this one because he's the red herring. And then I thought and said, wait a minute. If he's the red herring and all the readers think he's behind everything, if I kill him right now, I'm going to throw all of them for a loop, and I killed him right then. And I'd figure out why later. Eventually, that death proved to be key to the whole mystery. But the biggest reason I killed him was not because of some vast future plan. It was I was looking at try-fails, and I was having too many tries, too many successes, so I needed a turn. If you are pantsing, if you're discovery writing, you can use the structure of the game to tell yourself, maybe it's time I have a reversal of some kind. The motivation game, we kind of actually hit with Rapunzel already. The motivation game is about dividing the difference between goal and motivation. A motivation is what really matters to the protagonist or to the character, and a goal is what they think matters, or what somewhere deep inside they think will accomplish the goal. So maybe the motivation is she wants to be known and liked, and the goal of getting a new brush so she can brush out her beautiful, perfect hair isn't what she's really after at all. So the motivation game is a game very similar to the goal game, but now along the way, she gets closer and closer to goals or farther away from goals. But often, even as she gets closer to the goals, she starts discovering that, hey, this isn't satisfying me. Hey, there's something missing here, even as I get closer. And so part of what she has to succeed, and we kind of had that in our Rapunzel story, she needs to learn what she's really driven for. And she now can be looking towards accomplishing the motivation, and perhaps at some point even giving up on the goal, which she did in our story, because the motivation is more important to her. So the motivation game is a refinement of the goal game. Same structure, but the questions you're asking are now deeper and a little different. But the protagonist is only one character. We also can have a game for our antagonist. So we have our protagonist who wants something and what they want, but we may also have an antagonist who specifically does not want them to achieve that goal. And you ask, why don't they want them to achieve that goal? And then the protagonist takes their action to achieve a goal. But instead of just asking in general, why does it fail? We ask, what does the antagonist do to stop that? How does it actually make things worse now? So now the protagonist feels like they understand things a little better, but the antagonist has learned also the mettle of the protagonist and has better ideas of how to stop them. So now the protagonist makes the concerted effort, and the antagonist is ready and waiting and thwarts the concerted effort to actually make things far worse. So your protagonist is eventually at rock bottom, bad consequences, bad things happening, bad mood, and the antagonist is seeing victory in sight, sees a clear path for victory. What is the antagonist mood, and what's the antagonist going to do about it? But meanwhile, your protagonist now has to understand the world better, has to have a realization, has to dig deep to work towards a better plan, either a different goal and to follow motivation, or a goal to deal with the antagonist. And now they implement that plan and advance towards the goal. But now it's not just randomly that the protagonist loses the victory, right on the edge of victory, loses the goal. Now it's the antagonist snatching it away. So now the protagonist must do the final confrontation one-on-one against the antagonist with new strengths that they've learned, and now they can defeat the antagonist, and now they can achieve their goal or perhaps something more important. It is the same game, but now it is a clash of somebody who wants something and someone who wants them to fail for some reason. So the antagonist needs to be somebody who has their reasons why the protagonist must fail. We also have allies. These are people who want to help the protagonist. For whatever reason, the protagonist matters to them. Their protagonist is a friend, a helper, and possibly respects the protagonist, but not necessarily. The ally might, in fact, feel like the protagonist is a dumbass who has lessons to learn if they're ever going to be worth anything. You also might have cases where the protagonist doesn't respect their ally or even necessarily know their ally. They might have someone who's helping them, but the protagonist is too full of themselves to see it. Ally can be superior position, inferior, equal. They might have met before the story began, or part of what you have to include to the story is how they meet. But certainly you want to see the friendship change over the course of the story. So as other events are happening, you want to see a relationship growing there. And the ally almost certainly has their own goals besides just, hey, I want the protagonist to succeed. They might have their own goals. They might even have goals that are in a different direction from the protagonist's goals. Your ally may be faced with a choice of, do they help the friend or do they do the thing that they think is important? They may have their own motivation or a separate motivation. And certainly if they have a goal, there should be early indicators that they can't have it. There has to be challenges for the ally too. Now, the ally can be aiding the protagonist. Sometimes, if your ally is kind of clueless, your ally may actually end up hindering the protagonist. The protagonist has to save them from their own mistakes. Question to ask is, after all is said and done, after the story's over, are they friends now, or did something actually break in the relationship? Did the ally survive? Because sometimes allies don't. Sometimes that's the dramatic moment for the protagonist where, oh gosh, this person who mattered so much to me and I didn't realize it until too late and now they're gone. Do they have a goal that they complete? What consequences? Repeat for allies is needed. So I bet after that, you can kind of guess what the minion game is like. Minions are the allies of the antagonist. And you have the same sorts of questions, including, does the minion respect the antagonist and vice versa? Often, if you want to show your antagonist as an absolutely horrible, evil person, they don't respect their own minions. They burn them happily to achieve a goal. Minions are probably connected to the antagonist before the story began, but maybe not. Maybe you have an actual meeting of the antagonist and the minion when the minion says, hey, I'm on board for this. Minions might have their own goals. Aside from, of course, we have a whole series called Minions. In general, I think you find minions aren't quite as well developed as allies because it starts being a whole separate story at that point. So you're less likely for your minions to have their own goal, but they can have, especially if you're going to have minions who are going to, at some point, betray the antagonist because they realize that the goal they have is better served by allying with the protagonist, or the protagonist has done something to show that, hey, they are not the enemy, they are actually our ally. Do they survive? Do they achieve their goal? What are the consequences? Repeat for your minions as needed. So that is similar game applied to another character, and this is yet another one. Similar game applied to the love interest. So someone's in a relationship with a protagonist. You do have to ask if the attraction is mutual, and if not, who has it and who's resisting it, or even not necessarily resisting, might be unaware. Ask again the respect question. Do they respect the protagonist and the goal? Does the protagonist respect them? Does the relationship help the goal or even detract from it? This can often be the case of where the relationship fails is, well, the protagonist is so blinded by the goal that they don't continue. Were they involved before the story begins, or is their meeting part of the story? Think about how close the relationship is. How powerful is it? A very chaste Don Quixote type thing, or is it hot and heavy romance? Or certainly it might evolve across the story. Does your love interest have their own goals? Especially if we get into the genre of romance, conflicting goals is a huge part of what pulls the couple apart. Does the protagonist respect their love interest in the goal? Does the love interest aid the protagonist or hinder? And sometimes that hindering can make for some pretty tragic stories because now the protagonist is pulled in two directions. I want to take care of this person and I want to accomplish this goal. And very important question, what's the relationship after the story? How does it tear them apart or bring them together? And is it really within the pursuit of the goal, or is that a sideline? And if it's truly a sideline, you might ask yourself, is it helping the story or not? And one more, we have mentors. Someone who has something to teach the protagonist. What is the most important thing they're trying to teach, and why does the mentor choose to teach the protagonist? Sometimes when people are kind of following story formulas, you've got a mentor there because the formula says you have a mentor there. The mentor needs a reason to be teaching. It's not something that just happens because, well, the story said so. It really needs to be important to the mentor to do this teaching. It might be that this is a protagonist worthy of my teaching. It might be this protagonist is somebody I've got my own plans for, but they've got to be ready for it. It might be this person can succeed me because I've got not long left to go, but they need a reason why they're teaching the protagonist. Did they choose the protagonist and vice versa? Did the protagonist choose them, or was it forced upon them? Different stories, both equally valid. The forced upon them is kind of like, I'm stuck with you, kids, so you better learn this stuff because I need it. Again, did the relationship exist before the story, or do we have to show the meeting as part of the story? Also, just as much with the did the mentor choose the protagonist? Does the protagonist actually want to learn, or do they think that this mentor is full of it and they don't want to be taught? They already know everything they need to know. Does the protagonist resist the hard work of learning the lesson? Going back to, of course, our Empire Strikes Back in Star Wars. Luke was a lazy ass who didn't want to do all the lessons Yoda had in mind for him. I don't have to do that. Look, I can handle this. So the mentor had to get through to this, and Yoda did it by mocking and embarrassing Luke. Do they realize they've learned a lesson? You might have stories where the teaching is subtle, and only later do they realize that, hey, this actually is why I was with that mentor in the first place. And if they're a noble person, they'll acknowledge it. If they are a surly cuss, they may say, yeah, I would have figured that out on my own. Mentor may eventually part with the protagonist, either because the protagonist refuses to listen or runs off on their own, Luke and Yoda, or is often the case, going to another Star Wars, the original, A New Hope, the mentor gets killed along the way. Various versions of essentially the same game of this character has goals, this character has complications and conflicts that they fight with, and it's just lists of questions to ask for different character roles. So questions on that general category, the goal game and all the variations of the goal game. We have some chat going on that I haven't had a chance to look at. So Dave talking about hot in Iraq. Garbage bags are airworthy over there. Superman's hosting today. Yes, I am in my Superman costume for some strange reason. Yes, thank you for not saying obnoxious greeting, Kitty. Another thing that my sister-in-law is or at least was a huge fan of, that drove me nuts. We do not talk about Obnoxious Greeting Kitty. All right. Other questions?
I was gonna say Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove is a perfect example of a side character minion kind of taking over the story in some ways.
I have to confess, I've never seen it, but you are not the only Kronk fan I've met by any means.
He ends up being the comic relief, which is definitely the point of him. I mean, besides the other, all the characters are fairly hilarious, but it, yeah, as a minion, he definitely stands out. So,
yeah, he becomes a character in his own right. All right. So now let's look at some more. Oh, I forgot the rival game. One more of these. Actually, there's two more. There's one I forgot that comes after this yet. A rival is different from an antagonist, although somebody might be both. A rival simply wants to be better than you. Anytime they can be better than you, they get pleasure out of this, which can drive you nuts because then you want to be better than them. It can also sometimes get in your way without them even intending it. It can be a mutual rivalry or one-on-one. It can be friendly or antagonistic. They might actually like each other aside from the rivalry. And did it exist before the story started? Similar sorts of questions on the rival game. Often they end up allied at the end because the rival and the protagonist, through their rivalry, have come to respect things about each other and learn things about each other. And the last one, this really is the last one, is the goad. The person who is prodding the character to do things in the story, not because they care, not because they're an antagonist or a rival, but just because this is what they think should happen. So you get similar sorts of questions, but a shorter list because the goad is often a transient, temporary part of the story. If you remember Beverly Hills Cop, for those of you who are not so young, you've never seen it. Beverly Hills Cop, Axel's boss, is essentially a goad. He does things that force Axel onto the path where the story happens. Axel's friend comes to town, gets murdered. Axel wants to investigate. The boss says, no, we have a team to investigate this. Well, then I'll just go investigate on my own. No, we have people for this. You stay out of this. I am not nearly as loud as he was, and I'm not nearly as foul-mouthed as he has, but he basically keeps saying no, 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 to the point where Axel finally says, okay, I'm going to just take some time off. My friend died. I'm just going to take vacation time. I'm overdue. And the boss says, okay, get out of here. And Axel then gets on a plane and goes to Hollywood and Beverly Hills and investigates the stuff he was supposed to not investigate. So a goad has their reasons and their goals. They have a purpose in the story, but it's a smaller chunk. So one more type of character that can have their own game. So now we get to some other games, and we're going to start with the B story. For those who haven't run into the term before, the A story is the plot that you really have going on. When you're telling the story, this is what happens. The B story is something else that happens. It's a full story in its own, but it's not that A story. It's some secondary plot, some of the same characters, but it's not about the protagonist's goal, or it's about a different protagonist's goal. But often it is a goal for the ally, the mentor, the rival. It's for one of these others, which involves the protagonist, and it's going to shed light philosophically and mentally on their A story. But it's a story in its own that when you resolve, the protagonist has learned something. Save the Cat has a pretty good discussion on B stories, and the example they use from there is in the movie Legally Blonde. The A story is about Elle Wood going to Harvard Law so she can be with the boyfriend who really doesn't deserve her, but she has to figure that out. That's her A story. She has to go to law school and become a lawyer or a candidate for a lawyer in order to accomplish her goal of pleasing the boyfriend, and later of snubbing the boyfriend, and later of she don't need the boyfriend because she's found something more important for her. That's the A story. The B story is she goes to a fitness center to work out because that's part of how she deals with stress in her life, and meets the woman at the fitness center who is sort of a kind of a Greek chorus. She has commentary on things going on in Elle's life, but also has her own complexities that she's dealing with in her life. And as Elle tries to help her deal with these, Elle starts realizing more about herself as a negotiator and a legal tactician. So your B story helps the protagonist learn about their A story, typically told at the same time. It can be chronologically parallel. It can also be flashbacks or flash forwards. And I'm going to spoil one of my favorite books ever to give a great example of this. So, if you do not want to hear about a 40-year-old science fiction book called Mind Killer by Spider Robinson, which he later rewrote into a noticeably different story as part of a larger series, but I'm going to spoil this for you. The book involves two characters. One is a college professor and his interesting antics on campus where he doesn't fit in well. He is a nonconformist. He's trying to teach, not to fill out paperwork and go through all the motions. He has romantic entanglements, sometimes with students and their parents, and he has all sorts of other stuff going on, which becomes deeper and darker and more dangerous the longer he goes. Meanwhile, the other chapters are about a burglar who breaks into an apartment, finds a woman on the verge of suicide, nurses her back to health, and starts getting caught up in the whole world of wireheading, basically planting pleasure wires into your brain to activate your pleasure structure, running on basic household currents. So it's the ultimate addictive drug, which tends to kill people because once you've got that pleasure center, you don't care about things like eating. And he starts trying to find the people behind this. Meanwhile, the professor is starting to deal with weird things happening, and you start putting together the pieces to realize that the professor is operating in a world where wireheading hasn't started yet. And the burglar is operating in a world where it's become a serious problem. But both of them are facing people who are out to interfere with their investigations. And you're realizing that I'm not even sure which one is the A story here, which one is the B story, because they both start getting really dangerous and tense. But you start to recognize that one of these is a before and one of these is an after. So it is either flashbacks or flash forwards. Now, I'm not going to spoil the rest of the story because I've already spoiled enough, but that revelation that these two storylines are not happening at the same time had a serious impact on this. So our B story of, we'll call it The Burglar because that was the one that came second in the book. That B story had serious revelations that made sense of the A story, not for the protagonist, but for us as the reader. So the B story game is you say, I need to have a B story. You don't have to, but especially as you get into longer novels, it starts becoming useful to have another perspective on the narrative. If you're going to have a B story, you start with who's the focus of it. Probably not the protagonist, probably one of the other characters we've looked at. And you figure out their game, either original goal or motivation game. Figure out what their story is in the same sort of question and answer way. And now look for ways for the B story and the A story to alternate or intersect. And how does this B story now hindering the protagonist? And how does it actually help the protagonist? Again, in the special case of Mind Killer, it's not really hindering or helping the protagonist, but it's helping the reader. It's helping the reader to know things that the two protagonists don't know. And so what lesson does the protagonist learn from the B story? I can't tell you that Mind Killer. It does happen, but I can't tell you because that's the ultimate spoiler. But then how does the resolution of the B story game actually help the resolution of the protagonist game? So going back to Legally Blonde, helping the fitness store woman to get control of aspects of her life that she's lost control over, helping to be a lawyer, essentially, that woman needs, helps Elle to have confidence so when she faces up against more serious challenges, she has no doubts now. She's capable if she applies herself. So your B story game is largely doing the goal game or the motivation game for another character and weaving it into the A story. Now, the juggling game is less of a game. It's really kind of more of a method of keeping track of things. And for me, I make just a big chart. And a chart has all the different characters, and I'm watching hooks as they go along. As I'm starting to put the story together, I go back and forth and make sure that something is happening. This is why I'm calling it juggling. Something is happening with every one of my main characters all along. So I'm not trying to have a chapter of Torg and a chapter of Torg and a chapter of Torg and a chapter of Torg, because all of a sudden now it's Torg's book and the other two are just guests. So I want to be juggling these by going back and forth and saying, well, what's happening while Torg is in jail? What's happening to the other two? Well, Alestros and actually Galliana both are on a train going somewhere trying to decide where they're going. Okay, so now we've got them on the train. So now when I go back to Torg, it's like, okay, he's getting in the car and driving with Marta to go meet the train in Oklahoma. And so now I've got them taken care of. So now I've got to keep the juggling game. If you don't like the juggling metaphor, you can think of the old plate spinning metaphor. If you haven't seen plate spinning, it's of course a juggling act where you basically spin plates on little rods and you have to keep each plate spinning so fast that it doesn't fall off. This is really what the juggling game is about, is making sure that you have something going on with each character in an ensemble sort of piece. And if you don't, fill it in. If you've got things where it's too much of one character, can you rearrange the pieces, or can you put in new pieces to try to keep things going? Or even sometimes can you skip pieces of, well, that is obvious. We can summarize that with a line of dialogue. We can skip that piece. Our next one is controversial. And I'm going to tell you, screw it. Embrace the controversy. It's a tool, and you decide whether it's a useful tool or not. Edgar Wallace's Plot Wheel. The gentleman over here on the left is Edgar Wallace. Unless you're a fairly deep literature student, you probably haven't heard of him. I literally only knew about him before I started these slides. I only knew about him with reference to the Plot Wheel. But supposedly, no one can find historical records to confirm this. Supposedly, Wallace made this giant wheel of things that might happen in a story, and anytime he wasn't sure where to go next, he spun the wheel, and that's what happened. That was supposedly. On the other hand, this gentleman in the middle here is Earl Stanley Gardner. He's a little more recent. Some of you certainly will know the name. Many of you will know the name Perry Mason, because Earl Stanley Gardner was the creator of Perry Mason, and him we don't consider it apocryphal. He has lots of information on using plot wheels, plural, not plot wheel singular, to help him work through plots of stories. And then we have this guy. If you don't recognize him, I would say there's a 99% chance you have seen one of the movies based on Stephen King's books. And if you're a reader, there's a very good chance you've read some of his books, because he's written so many, it's almost like you can't help running into them. And he hated even the concept of a plot wheel. He thought the whole idea is absurd. Stephen King makes most pantsers look like rigid outliners. That he just does the next damn thing that seems to make sense to him. And he does it very well. I think the man is one of the best stylists I have ever read, but sometimes he paints himself into corners beyond belief. Some of his endings disappoint me, but I love the ride getting there. And he absolutely loathed this. He was the one, he talks more about Edgar Wallace and Plot Wheels than practically anyone else. Anytime I did a search for Edgar Wallace, there was a very good chance that the first thing I would find was Stephen King dumping on the Plot Wheels. And he's had lots of movies made of his stuff, so he knows what he's talking about, right? Well, it turns out that if you were of the right age in England, late 19th, early 20th century, a quarter of all books published in England were written by Edgar Wallace. And he wrote screenplays, and stage plays. And he's a journalist, poet. He wrote 957 stories, 170 novels, 160 film adaptations. He wrote the screenplay for King Kong. This was no small writer in his day. We barely know of him today. But this guy was big. And he supposedly invented Plot Wheels. And Earl Stanley Gardner, we say he invented Perry Mason. And if you're like me, you grew up with the TV show playing. It's like, yeah, okay, Perry Mason's like, no. For a while, at the time of his death, he was the best-selling novelist in America, with 82 Perry Mason novels and a bunch of others, hundreds of short stories. He had film and radio and TV adaptations, and he made lots and lots of use of his own Plot Wheels. On the other hand, Stephen King, 65 novels. By the time since I wrote this slide, he's probably got 3 more done. Nonfiction books, short stories, screenwriter. Absolute contempt for Plot Wheels. So who are you going to listen to? And if you've been around me for a while, you know my answer. Tools, not rules. I'm not going to tell you you must use Plot Wheels, but Stephen King telling you must not use Plot Wheels is just as wrong. There are tools for you to consider, and they might be helpful for you. They might be a game you can use to think through your writing. And in fact, we're going to look specifically at Earl Stanley Gardner's 4 Plot Wheels, because he had 4 different ones for 4 different situations. So, hostile minor characters. Remember what I was saying? I needed to change up the story. Now, I did it by killing somebody, but you might change up the story by introducing a new character who is making things difficult for the hero. So he has a list. He has a wheel, but you can do it with dice. You can do it with a spreadsheet. He has a list of these hostile minor characters, and you pick one out. You might just pick one out because you say, hey, that's what I want. You might not choose randomly at all. You might look at this list and get inspiration to say, you know what? That hotel detective isn't going to like this protagonist nosing around the hotel and is going to get suspicious. So we're going to pick the hotel detective. And then the second wheel is complicating circumstances. He only had 12 here. I'm surprised he didn't have more on this one. But things that can make the solution of the story harder for the detective or harder for the protagonist. So we said that, hey, the hotel detective is going to be the minor complicating character. So now that detective, looking at number 5 here, believes the hero is guilty and tries to arrest him or her at a critical time. That's, again, picking. That's not spinning the wheel. But that is one possible complicating circumstance. Our third wheel is blind trials. Things that put the protagonist off on the wrong path. So we look at this. We've got 16 different things that could happen that would make life difficult. Notice that a lot of these on Gardner's wheels seem to be oriented towards crime fiction because that's what he was writing. So they might not be the best wheels for you. You might change the wheel up a little bit. But here are a bunch of the blind trials that a detective particularly might run into, such as a witness takes flight. So while the hotel detective is busy arresting our protagonist, the witness sees this is going on, realizes he's being followed, and takes off. And the last wheel is how the protagonist gets around the complication. So again, you spin on it or you look for one that makes sense, something that will help you figure it out. maybe here that the witness has run away. So now the detectives, the protagonists, like, I need to get the villain to overreach. I need to say, well, I've lost the person I'm after, but what if they didn't know the witness got away? So I'll get a newspaper story published, one of the oldest tricks in mystery fiction, get a newspaper story published about what I have learned, dropping hints so that they have to come after me. Now, this might seem a little gimmicky, but first, if you do some plain math and think of these as outline points, not as whole stories, just some plain math gives you 3,600 outlines on this if you only do it once. If you don't go back and spin the wheels again, you've got potentially literally trillions and trillions of possible outlines that could come out of this. Are any of them any good? Well, here's where I think King is really off base. Sorry, King, you made more money in the past hour collecting royalties than I have made this year. But still, sorry, you were wrong in this particular one. You don't blindly follow the wheel. You say, hey, does that help me get moving? The details are what you do with these outlines, what you make of them. The wheels themselves are not a straitjacket. They're just some prompts to work on. Because prompts are good. Prompts are very good. I'm going to take you back to physics class for those of you who remember physics class, and for those of you who don't or are never there, they're giving you Physics 101, 1 day of lecture here. Only I'm going to compress it into a few minutes. Friction is what makes it hard for things to move around other things. It makes it hard to push things across a surface. So if you have a block laying on a surface, so we have our purple block laying on our white surface, gravity is pulling that block straight down, which means that as you push, you have gravity, but more than gravity, gravity is actually physically bringing the atoms of the block slightly inside the atoms of the surface. This is what friction is about pushing against the intermeshing of their molecular interfaces. And even if I lift that surface up a little bit, gravity is still mostly pulling me down, straight down. And so even though there's an angle there, that block is not going to slide. But if I lift it up high enough, now the force is easier to go in the direction of the plane. And it starts sliding and sliding and sliding. And even if you now drop the thing back down to where it wouldn't move before, now it's got momentum. You've gotten it started. It starts moving. Friction, one of the fundamental rules of physics, is there is starting friction and there is sliding friction. And we'll talk about rolling friction. That's another kind. But starting friction, static friction, they sometimes call it, is always greater than sliding friction. Getting moving is harder than keeping moving. And that's all that prompts are about. That's all. Prompts are about getting you moving. They're not about you must actually do these things. You might have looked at these plot wheels and come up with some things that got you started writing. And then by the time you actually finish the story, you find that you never touched any of them. The writing group that I go to every other Saturday here in Dorr, Michigan at the library starts every meeting with a 15-minute writing prompt where they write a prompt on the wall and we write for 15 minutes. And the prompt last Saturday was given a new name. And I'm in the middle of writing a science fiction mystery novella where one of the last recent events was two people who connected to a crime said that they thought that the dead body was their son's girlfriend, Melissa. Now, I know for a fact that yes, that's her, but no, that's not her real name. That is just a name she goes by. her real name is a revelation coming and it's going to make life complicated. But it's like, oh, given a new name, that is a good prompt to fit with what I've written in my story. So I start telling that story, and I get that block moving down the slide, and I spent about 2 paragraphs of a 15-minute writing session on her name, and spent the rest of the time writing about why it was hard to identify her despite all the advanced computers on Mars, because somebody was hacking the computers and they had to solve this problem before they could make any progress on the case. I abandoned the prompt. The prompt got me moving. The prompt was not a goal in itself. So it's not a straitjacket. The important thing is your writing. And also, especially, because I sometimes do, and some of you have seen this, a presentation called The Instant Story Show, where I have the audience give me a prompt and I tell a story from that. Sometimes the audience wants to play Stump the Author and give me a prompt that can't be written. Then I take another one. The prompt is to help me. The prompt is not the goal in itself. If the prompt isn't helping me, just get another prompt. So a prompt game, and there's a number of these. A prompt game is all about getting you started. And remember I said at the start that we're going to have a whole sort of additional session at the end. We're going to look at some of these prompt games. So I'm just going to talk about them extremely briefly, and then we'll talk about them more after we're done talking about games. Plot wheels we talked about. We talked about the Firetober prompts. We'll look at some of Dean Wesley Smith's one. I'll bet you thought I was going to get through a whole talk without mentioning Dean Wesley Smith. Bradbury, we talked about one from that. We're going to talk about story decks and dice. We're going to look at Tricia Levensler's favorites list. I give her full credit. This is an idea she presented at a conference, and I immediately fell in love with it. We're going to talk about a lot of prompts after we're done talking about games, which we are close to. Yeah, I'm only a little over. We're getting close. Trust me, we really are. If you've studied improv, you have probably heard yes and. Yes and is a great sort of game, a lot less structured than the other ones we talked about. The goal with yes and is just say something to move you forward and never say no to it. Just keep moving forward until you have an idea you can write. So you can start with any prompt and say yes and more. So you say, well, Mr. Spock wants a pet. Yes, and he wants a cat. Yes, and the captain's allergic to cats. Yes, and Mr. Spock is in love with this cat, and you know how hard it is for Vulcans to fall in love with something. Yes, and the captain is not going to let him have this cat, so he's going to have to find a way to cure the allergy. Yes, and he's going to have to work with Dr. McCoy on that, and Dr. McCoy is a curmudgeon. Yes, and he's also a curmudgeon who does like small furry creatures, as we saw with the Tribbles. Yes, and we saw that Spock actually also stroked the Tribbles. Yes, and we saw that Captain Kirk hated the Tribbles. Yes, and, yes, and, yes, and. The point of this as a game is just keep throwing out ideas until you get to a point where you either say, this is ridiculous, it's not getting us anywhere, or you say, man, I see something there. You write that much and then maybe start again. This one, full credit to Orson Scott Card, is almost the exact opposite of yes and. He calls it 1,000 stories in an hour. I never remember that name, so I just call it the say no game. And I've watched him do this with Writers of the Future winners. He has done this with middle school kids, teaching writing to them. He's done it with his classrooms. It's a very simple thing, which is you say no. So you say, give me a character. And using the example of the middle school kids, they'll say, middle school girl. And he says, no, go deeper. A middle school girl who goes to our school. No, go deeper. A middle school girl who goes to our school and is short of money and is trying to deal with that. Okay. Now you ask what she wants. Well, she wants money. No, go deeper. She wants some money because she wants new shoes. No, go deeper. She wants new shoes because she wants to be on the basketball team and she thinks that that is going to help her perform better on the court. Okay. And now you ask what she does to achieve that goal. Well, she goes out and get a job. No, go deeper. She gets a babysitting job. No, go deeper. She gets a babysitting job, babysitting the kids who are notorious for making babysitters run screaming into the night. Okay, now what goes wrong, and so on. His point in this game is simply don't take the easy path. Whatever's the first thing that comes to you is something you've probably seen 100 times. So every time you get to a point in the story, which might be following the goal game or another sort of thing, but every time you get to a point, reject your early ideas because they're too easy. And it's frustrating when it happens to people at first. It's like, you asked for a character, I gave you a girl. No, go deeper. But about the third question, they start realizing the game and realizing that they're ending up with a much better story potential by simply saying no to the first idea. Hero's Journey. If you've studied Campbell, you've seen this one, or if you've heard George Lucas talk about Star Wars ad infinitum, he's talked about this one. He pretty much popularized it in the modern audience mind of the idea of a story having kind of a circular pattern where you're starting in your ordinary world, you're getting your call to adventure, but you refuse the call, and now you've got a mentor, etc., etc., etc. We're already over, so let's go straight to the game based on this. And you really just ask questions at every one of the 12 steps in the hero's journey. So what is the ordinary world with the hero? Why are they in that world? Why do they like that world and want to stay there? But what are they lacking? What might they learn or gain outside? So what's the call to adventure? And why is this call something that only that hero can satisfy? And why do they have to leave that world to satisfy it? And then why they refuse the call? Then who's the mentor? And why does the mentor want to be there? And how are they persuading the hero? When they cross the threshold into the outside world, why are they finally leaving? What made them decide to leave? And how do they know they've left? And so on and so on. Whole list of questions for each of the stages here to flesh it out from a pretty picture on a diagram to actual planning for your story. Similarly, I mentioned Blake Snyder, Save the Cat, has this beat sheet, which is, if you are a mathematically inclined person, honestly is mathematically congruent with the hero's journey. It really kind of is. So you have your opening image, which is the thing that establishes what your normal world is like. Your theme stated, where this is what this movie is really about, but you maybe don't realize it yet. You have a catalyst, which is going to cause change, sort of like the call to adventure in the hero's journey. Then you have a debate, a long series where the protagonist is saying, I don't really think I have to go, right up until Act 2 when they go, and now they start exploring this new world. And here comes your B story and your A story back and forth between them up to a midpoint, which is either a false victory, we've succeeded, or it can also be a false defeat of, man, we're screwed. Coming out of that is the bad guys close-in session where, okay, everything before that was fun and games. We were kind of exploring this world. Now we've got to get serious because the forces of bad, whether it's actual forces or circumstances, are closing in on us to an all is lost moment where you have a dark night of the soul where it's like you've just bottomed out. You have to figure out what really matters to you because your plans are all failing. And you need a better one. When you get your better one, you break into your Act 3 and you start getting your team executing the plan, but something goes wrong. And so now you got to dig deep down and execute the new plan to a final image, which is echoing your opening image. And notice how he has 9 or 10 beats within each of those acts. This is a structure kind of oriented towards screenplays, but it can be used for novels as well. Our game here is essentially asking all those same questions, asking what are all these different steps along the way, including what are your beats in each act, or half act in the case of Act 2. Screenwriters count funny. I see 4 acts here. I see setup and debate. I see fun and games. I see bad guys close in Dark Knight of the Soul. I see finale and final image, each roughly the same size. So I would call that 4 acts. Screenwriters say no. Fun and games and bad guys close in and Dark Knight of the Soul is all 1 act, broken into 2 pieces. But it's not 2 acts. It's 1 act. This is why they went into writing and not into math. So the Save the Cat game is just about answering the questions there in the beat sheet. Murphy paths are something, and now we see why I'm wearing this t-shirt. I don't know why you thought I was wearing this t-shirt, but obviously I wore the t-shirt because of this example of Murphy paths, again drawn from Making Story Models, where we have Superman, alias Clark Kent, wants to submit a story, so he's going to check with his sources, send Jimmy out to get photos, he's going to write a draft, he's going to confirm with the sources, he's going to get the photos from Jimmy, he's going to submit the draft to Perry, he'll get revision notes, and he'll send the revisions to Perry, and the story's submitted. And that would be a tremendously boring story. So we're going to Murphy it up. Murphy, of course, the old Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. So the very first step, he says, I want to check with my sources, and he can't find his source. So now he has to search for the source. And if he found the source, we just go right back to the original path. But if he can't find the source, even with his super senses, then he needs to call the world's greatest detective, aka Bruce Wayne, aka Batman. And Bruce can find the source. Well, no, because that's still not a really interesting story. Bruce is going to have to find the source, but we find out that he can't get a hold of Bruce because Bruce is on a case of his own in Metropolis, because coincidence drives comic book stories quite often. So Bruce is already in town, so Superman suits up, goes to look for Bruce, and Bruce finds the source. No, we still want more complication. He finds Batman in battle with Luthor's goons. So now they're going to team up to fight the goons. They defeat the goons. They find the clue to the source. And it's no, we want something yet more Murphy than that. They lose to the goons because of Luthor's super science. So now they have to search for clues. Now they need to track the goons down to the lair. So Luthor got them with a kryptonite beam and a sonic beam. So he was going to be able to defeat both of them because of their weaknesses. So now they get to fight the Luthors and his goons and giant robots. And the goons could get defeated, but you know, we've still got the kryptonite beam and the sonic beam. So they're going to use the super weapons again, but they use the old switcheroo. And if you grew up in comics in the 50s and the 60s, the old switcheroo happened so many times, it got a little disgusting. Where Superman dressed up in Batman's costume and Batman dressed up as Superman. So they used the kryptonite ray on Batman and they used the sonic ray on Superman, and neither one worked. And so now they can rescue the source and get the information so they can send Jimmy out for photos. The Murphy game simply consists of creating what seems like a linear plot, whether it's a diagram like I draw or just bullet points on a spreadsheet or whatever. And then for every point, and you don't have to use every point, but think about it. What could go wrong? What would happen? There's a new Murphy point. And does it lead back to the original plot or spawn a different point entirely? So you're just walking through the story saying, what could go wrong? What happens? What could go wrong? What happens? And when you find a path you like, because the real goal is writing, when you find a path you like, you don't have to keep Murphying. You go on from there. We talked about this in our very first jazz session, the South Park secret.
We can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word "therefore" or "but." Right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No. It should be this happens, and therefore this happens.
So this, again, we talked about this in session 1 for those of you who are here. We start with a simple and then story. Bob goes to the barn, his horse escapes, the dog bites him, his boss fires him, he gets lost in the desert, he finds a horse, finds a lost treasure, but he loses everything, and his girl breaks up with him. This is an example from making story models again. Let's put it into a therefore and but grid. And now we had Bob goes to the barn and with his horse escaping. That was the original plot. Why is his horse escape? There's a missing element there. But he leaves the door open. Therefore, his horse escapes. And then his dog bites him. And then, no. So he gets mad. He grabs the dog's collar and tugs him out to search. Therefore, he got mad, but his dog bites him. And so on and so on and so on. You can take the plot points and rearrange them into therefores and buts and occasional and thens for stuff that really is surprising. And rearrange it in a game to get something that's more complex with missing pieces filled in. You might even take it to my extra level of adding meanwhiles and eventuallys. It's just taking a linear plot and turning it into a plot with reasons and causality. So you create your linear point and then say, if it's an and, what's missing? Fix it. If it's a therefore, a but, eventually, or maybe, move it where it belongs and fix the missing pieces. We are going to look, boy, this is going to run long. We are going to look at mystery element map. This one comes again from making story models. This is sort of a map of common things in mysteries, not mandatory things. You can have a mystery which is nothing more than a criminal and a crime, and the criminal thinking through the consequences that never realized. But these are common things you might have in a mystery. You've got a crime right in the middle, because otherwise is it a mystery. You've got a criminal committing it, a detective investigating it. You've got a victim. Typically a crime has a victim. You've got motives. You've got suspects, because it's too simple if the criminal is immediately obvious. You've got witnesses, you've got information, you've got sources, you've got reports, you've got all of these potential elements. The mystery game is just identifying these pieces. Before you sit down to write, you sit down and look at this diagram and ask, do I have all the pieces that I need? And again, you don't necessarily need all of them. Just, do I have the pieces? Related to that is the romance element map. Again, comes out of making story models. This one is more complicated, for one thing, because it's symmetrical. Because a romance story has two leads. You have two partners in the romance or in the potential romance. So there's a symmetry that everything on the left mirrors everything on the right. And again, these aren't must-haves. These are things that might happen. So your lead might have family obligations with a relative. Your lead might have career obligations with a coworker. Your lead might have just a difficult choice they have to make, something related to the relationship or not. They might have social obligations, friends that depend upon them, and they might even have an existing romance and romantic obligations. And the other lead might have any of those. And in the middle are how they connect. So you've got your meet cute, you've got your attraction between them, flirting, you've got bad timing, because if it goes too easy, was it really a good, satisfying romance? And so on and so on. You've got all of these elements. And the romance game consists of sitting down and identifying the ones you know until you feel like you've got the pieces necessary to carry out a romance. So, romance element map is really complicated. Again, not mandatory elements, but common potential elements. And then we go to the other extreme. And this is for science fiction or fantasy, what our late mentor, Dave Wolverton, often called just wonder. And when I sat down to build a science fiction fantasy element map, it was way too hard, complicated, because I couldn't understand what were the common elements across an entire century or more of stories. And eventually I stripped it down to change. Wonder stories are about something is different. And that drives the story. Something is different, and somebody maybe is an instigator who caused it for some motive. Somebody is an opponent who tries to stop it for some motive. And some people benefit from this change and try to build on it, protect it, and even want to advance it further. And some people might be victims of this change who want to resist and undo and escape. And those elements are true of any wonder story, that something is changed. Now, it might be two different kinds of change, or it might be both. One change is, this is a different world from ours. This is a different world. This is a world where cats can talk, and everybody knows cats can talk, and this is the world as it would be if cats talked. That is a change from our world. You can also have a change from their reality, that this was a world where dragons were everywhere and everyone dealt with dragons. Some were friendly, some were unfriendly, but everyone dealt with dragons. And the change in this story is suddenly all the dragons are gone. And what's going to happen to this world now that the dragons have disappeared? So you have to identify when and how the change transpires. Although you may not answer the how right away for story reasons, maybe you need to think of why it is. Now, not necessarily. A classic example of the Wonder game is Groundhog Day, where Phil is caught in a time loop and can't get out. They never explained how. The screenwriter has written a book on how he wrote the screenplay. He never explained how. He never knew how. No one knew how it happened, and it didn't matter for this particular story. Just this past week, somebody was talking about Groundhog Day and story structure, and I read a fan theory that I fell out of my chair laughing. The purpose of the time loop was that Ned Ryerson was going to keep Phil Connors in that time loop until Phil bought an insurance policy. And, you know, that's as much explanation as anything else that makes any sense in the movie. You have your instigators. But again, you might not know. If you don't know where the change came from, you might have opposition, identify their motives, and identify how they work, and their beneficiaries and their victims. Identify all of these pieces in a change story, and then explore where that leads you. Now we're in a radically different sort of diagram. This is the onion diagram. And this particular one from Making Story Models is the onion diagram of the movie Chinatown. And they call it an onion diagram because there are layers and layers and layers of discoveries. And the outer discoveries are hiding the inner discoveries. So we start with that we have, what's his name? Geddes. Geddes getting a visit from a woman who wants him to investigate something. And the more he digs, the worse it gets and the more complicated it gets, up until the point where he eventually learns that this is a story about incest and rape within a powerful family and how everything has been set up to protect the powerful man from the consequences of his action, right up to the middle where the police actually kill his daughter/lover because she was going to spill the beans on him. The onion game is simply figuring out what the biggest secret is, who hides it and how, and that creates another secret. And who hides that and how, and that creates another secret. And so on and so on and so on, until you've got all the secrets, and now your detective, your protagonist, unravels the secret layer by layer by layer. All right. Ultimately, you can come up with your own games. You can come up with questions to ask to help you think about a story in a low stress, low pressure way that you're just throwing away an hour as a thinking exercise as opposed to frowning at the keyboard and not able to make any progress. Play a game. Play one of these, play one of your own. Find ways to ask questions with no consequence, and it frees up your brain to think differently. All right, so here's our upcoming schedule. Next week, we will be looking at frame stories and other nonlinear narratives. Then we'll be talking about levels of learning. August 3rd, I'll get around to my tribute to Dean Wesley Smith, since I seem to mention him in just about every one of these sessions. We'll talk about distance and scope in space, learning from improv, the Bradbury method, and learning progression. And then we will start out a series of sessions on making story models. Now, again, paying for the soup. Remember, the book on the left is only available at the QR code on the left as part of the Writers of the Future e-bundle. So that's the only place you're going to find that. Questions before we get into the bonus session? I see a couple of things in chat. Fred had to go, yes. And Dave had to go. Okay. For the rest of you, again, if you have to take off, fine. But I want to talk about prompts now, unless you have questions on games. All right. Then let's talk about prompts. A few prompt examples. This one, character setting problem. I first learned it from Dean Wesley Smith, who first learned it from Algis Budrys, who first learned it from somebody going back into far history. It's not a new idea, but it was an interesting presentation of a prompt of take a character, put them in a setting as that character perceives it, and identify a problem as that character understands it, and explore that, and you will be establishing things about your character and your setting and working towards the bigger problems to come. So that's a simple prompt. Related to that is a 24-hour story, which is taught as an exercise at Writers of the Future. Nothing says you can't do it on your own. You don't need them to do it. It helps because Writers of the Future gives you a supportive environment with no complications whatsoever, nothing around you, just this story. Take a random object, you read from a random source of books or such, interview a random person, not telling them you're interviewing. You just want to learn something about their life. And this is kind of your character and your setting and your problem, although it's not quite setting and problem, but your object and your book can give you elements that are setting and problem. And now, tell a story in the next 24 hours, which sounds intimidating as hell. I am not aware of anyone who has ever failed in this exercise at Writers of the Future, where there's something else you have going on anyway, and you have a deadline, so that gives you focus. So as an example, my 24-hour story, and I don't know if they still do this, they used to stretch it out, that you got your random item on an early day in the workshop, and you got your random book and random person the next day. And this was a trap, because I took my random item and I thought I knew what my story was going to be. It ended up nothing at all like this. But my random item was a 7 years Alcoholics Anonymous sobriety chip. And so I'm like, okay, so this is a character who is dealing with alcoholism and dealing with temptation. I got it. Okay. And then my random book, they took us to a library, a different one than they normally went to. They were changing things up. Turns out the library they took us to was a children's and foreign language library. And I didn't see like I was going to get much out of children's stuff. So I went to the foreign language stuff. I'm horrible at languages. I had 4 semesters of college Russian, and I think I have a 20-word vocabulary in Russian, but I'm not even sure if I have that many. But I said, I'll look at some Russian science fiction. So I found a science fiction book with a picture of a big, muscular spaceman in a big blue jumpsuit and everything, and a bunch of white hairy aliens running away from him because he was here to take care of them. And I said, okay, so I think they're my heroes, or they're somehow important, and he's obviously the villain. And then my interview, finding a stranger to talk to. This is the terrifying part for a lot of us because writers often were introverts. My random interview was, I said, I need a haircut. and I had to have a hairstylist talk to me for 20 minutes as she cut my hair. And I ended up with an Armenian hairdresser who had come to Los Angeles to cut hair, not because cutting hair was her passion, but because moving to America and living in Hollywood was her passion. And she sat down at her home in Romania and did the research to find jobs she could do, and found, hey, there's always demand for hairstylists. And she learned hairstyling and got her visa to come here and moved here and settled into Hollywood and achieved her dream, and was just this absolutely fascinating person about this, that this was, she was so energetic, she was so bubbly, and she was such a good character in that she had accomplished this goal by determination. And it happened to be that this was the year that was the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, and she had a TV playing, and a documentary about the genocide came up, and click. It was like a switch flipped in her brain, and she became an entirely different person, because what was a history documentary up on the TV for her was her uncles and her grandfathers and other ancestors lost in that war. I said, this is a astonishing contrast. That's my story. I need to take my weird aliens and my idea of a genocide and people trapped, and I need to turn this all into a story involving an Alcoholics Anonymous ship in Los Angeles, because that's where I'm at right now. And I proceeded to tell a story. I ended up, this is not required. They require you to complete a story. I ended up about 10,000 words of a complete story that eventually went on to be named a candidate for year's best military and adventure science fiction, all from this prompt. And you know what? If it had failed miserably, I've lost a day. I invested a day in a prompt. I think I can spare a day sometimes to try something out. And if it doesn't work, I try something else tomorrow. Research itself is a prompt. Research all sorts of things. Research nonfiction, research fiction, research current events. Turn off that idea filter in your head that is saying, that's not important, and just fill your head with stuff. Fill your head with stuff from all sorts of places. And eventually you start finding, oh, but what if? And you're on the trail of a story. Dean did this one. He's not the only one again by any example, but he pointed this one out. Writing to title. He looked through old magazines to find old titles. Pick one and imagine what that story might be. And in a nod to Orson Scott Card, don't follow your first idea. Let it get a little deeper and start writing. Just let the title give you an idea for a story. Or to summary. Dean would do this with old TV guides. Do they still have TV guides around anymore? TV guides, once upon a time, used to have summaries of movies and so on. And they're like 30-word summaries or something like that. He'd pick up one of these catalogs or TV guides or whatever, look at the summary and say, I'm going to pick that and I'm going to start writing that how I think it would work. Tricia Levenseler, and I hope I haven't butchered her name, presented this concept at the Grand Rapids Comic-Con one year, and I just fell in love with it as a great prompting category or prompting approach, specifically for prompting your stories. Stories that make you want to read a story, and just create, and she gave an example of 6 lists. It doesn't have to be these 6 categories, but make lists of these things that matter to you, what character types you like, what relationship tropes, what fun stuff, personality traits. Write the ones that matter to you. And when you're looking at a story idea, look at your lists. So this is my personal answers, my personal lists from her general categories. So my character types, I love wizards and programmers and explorers, con artists, experts, and superheroes. Fun stuff, space, space, space. Robots, cats, cons, and so on. I made my list of what sort of things appeal to me in a story. If I take something from every one of these lists and put it together, I have a high chance of having a story that appeals to me, and I'm going to do a really good job at it. So maybe what I want is a con artist in space on a city ship. A city ship is a ship so big that it's a city in itself, and I'm in absolute love with them. And then look at the tropes of, okay, he is a con artist, but he has loyalty. He has strong loyalty to somebody. We'll figure out who. And so obviously one of his personality traits is he's loyal, but that's too obvious. But he's also going to be reckless. And this reckless character is going to have to stage a rescue or an escape. So we've got a con artist in space on a city ship who is very loyal to somebody, but also reckless. So he has to do a rescue, possibly of that person he's loyal to. And suddenly I could sit down and start writing this story here, but I owe you folks the rest of this presentation. You make your personal lists and then pull from them. And there's a high chance you're going to get a story that's meaningful to you. So Tricia is a genius. Go buy her books. Much simpler is just dictionary mining. And to me, this is still a lot easier with paper dictionaries. One of the beauties of paper versus the modern electronic dictionaries, paper is really random access. Whereas the modern electronic stuff, you want to kind of do a search for something specifically. Paper, you just flip to 3 random pages and words and put them together and get an idea. You might have story dice or story cards. There's a whole bunch of kinds of these on the market for it. Just random ways of generating ideas. Some of you will be more into older forms of divination, tarot or I Ching. Throw the tiles or deal the cards and look for ideas and start writing. And finally, and I can send you a copy if you're interested, I have created a giant spreadsheet of random lists. And you can put as many things in the list as you want. I'm up to like 200 or 300 things in every one of these categories. And you just push a button and it gives you some random answers, some random suggestions for prompts. And if they don't work, you push the button again. You get another set. So, just a few ideas of prompts. And hey, I've managed to keep most of you. Thank you. Questions on prompts, questions on games. I didn't quite go 2 hours. All right. Then my last game for you is go out and make a game. And go out and prompt yourself and get writing. Thank you all. And